Testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All righty, chat. So today's been a wild day. Wow, there's clouds outside. And they're changing the color of my face. It looks so strange. Okay. Welcome, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Wow, this is really strange. Oh my God. The color saturation. Hold on a second, chat. Is this better? I unchecked a box. The other one was muted? That's fine. It's okay. Sorry for being late. by like 3 hours. So things have been a little bit hectic for me. I apologize. But we're here a few hours late and really had a lot of questions that we wanted to get to. So fashionably late, no, I mean, this is like this crosses well over Indian Standard Time to like, Indian Standard Time is like 45 minutes late, maybe an hour late. But yeah, it's been quite a day. So yeah, okay. So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Boston. Just a reminder that everything we discuss today on stream is intended to be for educational purposes only, and nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. So if y'all have a question or concern, please go see a licensed professional. So we're going to jump right through announcements super quick. So we are launching parent coaching, or relaunching, I suppose. And y'all can sign up on over here if you or your parents need some help working with building your relationship with your kids, or especially around like technology addiction or setting healthy boundaries, or having conversations with your kids about setting healthy boundaries. That's what really our parent program is all about. Oh my goodness, we have someone in chat whose parents actually signed up. So check in with them, right? And see what their experience of it is, and give us feedback. Like, let me know in chat how they're doing. So it'll be kind of like your teacher communicating with your parents when you're in school. Now, like, the tables have turned, and you guys get to tell Dr. K how your parents are doing in the program. So the other thing is that we here at Healthy Gamer, we try to just support people, right? Like, we try to be sort of not necessarily judgment free. I know it sounds kind of weird, but we're actually all for judgment in a strange way. I think that, what we're about is authenticity and compassion as opposed to non-judgmentalness. So I know it's kind of weird, but sometimes you have to hold people accountable for what they say and they do. And you have to make a judgment that, hey, I'm okay with this, or I'm not okay with that. Right. And then you have to work on changing it. So interestingly enough, I think one of the biggest strengths of our coaching program is that we actually we encourage our coaches to trust their judgment, actually. And if someone is making a mistake, to, point it out to them in a compassionate way. And that compassion should be there with authenticity and should even take precedence over it. So in the East, we kind of talk a little, anyway, I'm getting too far off field. But anyway, if you guys are interested in parent coaching, check it out. I also want to thank chat and commend y'all for those of y'all that were here on Friday's stream. I really appreciate the attitude that y'all had. So we had a parent on stream actually talking about their interactions with their kid. They believe that their kid is playing too many video games. And I thought, y'all were quite respectful, which is what we want from you and what we hope from you. And I hate to say this, but now I think what we're going to start expecting from you. Right. So I think that too often we expect Twitch chat to be degenerate and memeing and stuff like that. And I think there were a couple of comments where I think what happened is we struck a chord, right? We struck a little bit of, some of y'all had a little bit of a flashback from your own parents in the way that they set limits. But try to remember that anyone who does come on stream, is doing so out of the hope to try to educate people, to try to share their struggles with people. And so we should respect them for doing that, which y'all did a fantastic job of. So good job. Another good example of that was, we've had a couple of people on recently, someone who spent some time in jail and someone who had some, arguably contrarian political views. And so I thought both of those were also stellar examples of what we've come to expect from this community, and have been fantastic. So thank y'all very much for being so kind. All right, so we're going to hop right into it. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of questions off of Reddit, but a couple of things that I want to talk about first. So we're going to do meditation a little bit differently today, partially because of time, but also because of, teaching different kinds of meditation. So I'm going to take a step back. This is all, by the way, this is all in Dr. K's guide if people are more interested in like more detail around this stuff. But so back in like ancient India or China, back in the day, there were people who were pursuing enlightenment. And so as these yogis or monks were pursuing enlightenment, they sort of discovered that there are 4 different paths to enlightenment. So the path of action, which involves like doing good deeds, so karma yoga. The path of knowledge, which involves like contemplation and sort of like thinking your way to enlightenment. I guess this is maybe a little bit closer to philosophy. The third path is the path of devotion. So this is what we sort of traditionally think of as religion. So the idea of devoting yourself to a god, a deity, or even an ideal, and through that pure devotion to an object, you can actually attain spiritual growth and potentially even enlightenment. So the interesting thing was that, the yogis sort of said that like it's the act of devotion to a divine figure that the spiritual growth comes from. So it sort of doesn't matter whether your object of spiritual growth is like Krishna or Jesus or Zeus. The yogis sort of came to an interesting conclusion that it's not so much about the particular god, which I know runs pretty contrary to a lot of other religions, that it's the act of the human being devoting itself to a thing, which is where the spiritual growth comes from. And then the fourth pathway is the path of willpower, which is like sort of the path that I personally follow. So that's the path of kind of systematic spiritual practices for the sake of cultivating spiritual energy and growth. So it involves doing yoga postures, different kinds of breathing techniques, meditation techniques. So most of the meditation that we teach on stream is from basically the Raja Yoga path. So it's the idea that meditation is like something that you do, that is kind of like you sit down and you do it for a while. It's a discrete practice that yields discrete benefits. So if we also look at, for example, the science on meditation, basically all of the science on meditation, all the meditation studies involve a discrete practice that's done for a particular amount of time. So those also all fall under the Raja Yoga tradition, or the path of willpower, which is like I sit down and I meditate as a verb. It's like something that I do for a while. If I do it for a while, then I'll get some kind of benefit. So today what I'm going to do is actually teach y'all a little bit of Jnana Yoga. And Jnana Yoga is the path of knowledge. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give y'all meditation exercises in a sense, but they're not like the normal meditation exercises where I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes and I'm going to do this thing, and that's what I'm doing. What we're going to do today is Jnana Yoga, which is a little bit more philosophical, contemplative, or inquisitive in nature. So to kind of brute force your way to enlightenment, you can just think about stuff and explore stuff and understand stuff. You can accumulate knowledge for the sake of spiritual growth. So I personally like Jnana Yoga a lot. It's very difficult. I prefer Raja Yoga for a reason. But I thought that especially as we go through some of the questions and posts on subreddit, we're going to give you guys sort of a different kind of meditation practice, which is something to think about, try, contemplate, sit on a park bench. So it's going to be like, it's not going to be a physical practice. There's not going to be any breathing involved or anything like that. You can absolutely combine something like a dharana or breathing practice or any of the normal meditations that we teach to these things. So I would do the meditation practice first, like the formal like breathing practice or whatever y'all want to do. And then you can sort of contemplate. But these are going to be the techniques we're going to teach today are going to be on the path of contemplation. Okay? So let's get started. No breathing allowed. Yeah, I need to take a break. I was talking too much. All right. So, let's take a look. So, oh boy, I sure do love being perceived as a gifted child. I hope I don't end up as being a perfectionist burnt out, I suppose, with depression, anxiety, unfulfilled expectations, and no real interests or goals. So, this is something that someone cross-posted to our subreddit. It's a meme. We've had a couple of streams about burnout and gifted kids. So today what I'd like to talk to y'all a little bit about is the pathway from gifted child to burnt out perfectionist, as well as sort of the way that society actually sets gifted children up to kind of fail. So I know it's kind of interesting, but when we think about a gifted child, we perceive gifted as an advantage. But in my experience working with a lot of gifted children, it's not always an advantage. And in fact, oftentimes it can be a burden. And so I've seen this a lot in our community. I've worked with a lot of people who kind of fall into this category. I suppose I sort of fall into it as well, where I grew up kind of gifted, right? So like school was easy for me. I was told from a very young age that I was smart. I was also kind of held accountable for like not studying, right? They were like, I'd kind of like not study very much and maybe get a B plus or an A minus. And my teachers would tell my parents the same thing every single parent-teacher conference. They would always say, well, if Alok just applied himself, he would be the best student in the class. If he only just like studied more, he'd be the best student in the class, right? They were like, he's super smart. He has a lot of potential, right? So they use these words like they talk about how smart I am. They talk about all the potential I have. And if I just applied myself, I'd be the best student. So it's kind of interesting because we perceive giftedness as an advantage. But as one of my teachers once told me, and we'll kind of get to this towards the end, they once explained to me that this is in not in medical school, but when I was training to become a psychiatrist, I had a supervisor who once told me that gifted children are special needs children. And what that literally means is that like the needs of a child who's gifted are actually different from the average child. And the parents who recognize that and recognize that this child is going to need like a slightly different structure, a different curriculum, or a different way of being raised are the ones that end up sort of doing a really good job. And oddly enough, in her clinical experience, she found that much like any other special needs children, kids that were not treated appropriately despite their gifts were the ones that kind of struggled. So this statement, when I first heard it, I thought was like absolutely ridiculous, kind of blew my mind a little bit, but I respected the supervisor a lot and I started thinking about it. So what I'd like to share with you all today is sort of the pathway that a gifted child takes, how a society treats them, how parents treat them, the kind of struggles they face or the influences that they have. Let's not even call it a struggle because it may not be a struggle. And then sort of how they end up. So I'd like to kind of share that with you all today, okay? So the first thing that tends to happen is when a child is gifted, school tends to be easy, right? So if you kind of think about it developmentally, there are a lot of different things that happen in school. So let's talk about school. So school is a place where you socialize, right? So you get socialization skills. It's a place that you learn, and people think that school is primarily about learning, and it is primarily about learning, but it's just not about learning the subject material. So sure, we learn like arithmetic and mathematics and all that kind of stuff. We learn history and science and all that good stuff. But really, school, if you kind of look at it developmentally, is a wonderful opportunity to learn certain key things. Socialization is a really important piece. The other thing is like habits and how to study. And this is the first sort of disadvantage that I think gifted children sort of face, is that, if you're young and you're gifted, school is so easy that you sort of get by without the luxury of studying. And so we kind of perceive this as an advantage, right? Like if you go through school and you don't study, like that's easy, like it's easy clap, right? And so it is, and that sort of makes sense. But the interesting thing that I found is that oftentimes being intelligent, especially when you're super young as a kid, actually sets you up for failure down the road because you never need to learn the habituated study like technique that you kind of need to, that you need to succeed later on. So for a normal kid, what tends to happen is like they don't have to study like in first grade, but maybe like second grade, third grade, they have to learn how to study like once a week. Maybe they like learn how to study the night before the test because it doesn't come easily to them. And then fourth grade, fifth grade, now you're doing homework a couple days a week. You're studying 2 or 3 days before the test. And then you kind of hit middle school where maybe you're studying like 4 days before the test. And so there's this very graduated sense of increasing responsibility as you go further and further in school. And it's sort of designed that way, right? We're not like, no teacher has a six-year-old that they're like giving 14 hours of homework a week to. It's just absurd. And then at the top end of the spectrum in terms of study habits and what we demand of students, you have something like, let's say, law school or medical school or things like that, where people are regular studying like 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week in medical school. Because, people have grown up and have built enough of a study habit where they can actually handle that pace of studying. So what happens with the gifted kid? So the gifted kid, when you sort of level up your skill to level 1, like in the first grade, and then you level up your studying skill to level 2 in the second grade and level 3 in the third grade. So the gifted kid never actually has to like grind that XP for levels like 1 through 5 of studying habits. And so they sort of manage to get B's or A's without really minimal studying or no studying at all. And then 7th grade rolls around, 8th grade rolls around, they start to struggle a little bit. Maybe they get B's. They're still not learning how to study because they sort of skipped that part of the skill building. And we'll kind of get to that later. And then what tends to happen with gifted kids is that they don't need to study, don't need to study, don't need to study, and then they hit a wall. They finally get into some kind of situation where their raw intellect is no longer sufficient to handle the schoolwork that they're supposed to handle. But they've trained themselves at that point, they've accustomed themselves at that point to managing school with raw intellect. And so when that kind of falls short, they really hit a wall. It's a very, very hard cliff to overcome. And so this is kind of the first thing that sort of shoots gifted kids in the foot. And this also leads to kind of this idea of perfectionism and burnout, because then they struggle a lot. They don't understand why they can't do it. They try, they know they're smart. Everyone's talking to them about potential. They start to feel really bad about themselves. So the first kind of interesting thing that gifted kids run into is the fact that they sort of don't develop the proper study habits because, as a 6-year-old, and it's kind of not your fault because you're not mature enough as a 6-year-old to realize I need, to have good study habits. So even though the teacher said this last Tuesday and I understand that I don't need to study, I'm going to sit down and practice my study habits. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely artificial. So that's the first thing that happens, is that they kind of hit this wall of not being able to study. The second thing to consider is the expectation. So another thing that really leads gifted kids kind of down the wrong path is the burden of expectation that's placed upon them. So from a very young age, they're told, oh, you're gifted, you're smart, you're special, you have so much potential. And so what that starts to do is it constructs a very, very lofty goal in their minds, right? So I'm going to use kind of an analogy, which is kind of if I think about an amazing home, I think about a mansion, it can have a beautiful blueprint, and I can buy a gigantic piece of land, and I can look at that and I can say this home or this blueprint has so much potential. And sometimes we kind of forget that you can have a blueprint for a mansion, but that's going to actually take way more work to achieve than building a shack. So the other really interesting thing that we sort of kind of get wrong societally is that we assume that when someone is gifted, things are actually going to be easier for them, that they need to work less to accomplish the same amount. But in my experience, living up to a gifted child's potential involves more work. It's sort of it's just like building a shack versus building a mansion. Sure, the mansion is capable of so much more than the shack is capable of. But let's not forget for a moment that the amount of effort that it goes into building a mansion is actually way more than what's required to build a shack. And this is the second place that gifted kids kind of get tripped up, because everyone around it is looking at them and they're sort of saying, oh, this is an amazing mansion. You could build such an amazing mansion. And we all kind of forget for a moment that actually living up to that potential is very, very difficult and requires a lot more of an investment than building a shack. And so this gap between what people expect of you and also the idea that things should be easier for you kind of compound on themselves and sort of end up with gifted kids kind of feeling like they're failing at everything, right? Because they have all this potential and they're just not living up to it. So the other thing that we'll see in gifted kids is that what tends to happen is that they will put in some amount of work, but they're expecting a mansion when all they've really put in is as much as building a shack. I may have lost y'all a little bit there, but let me just explain. So, what a gifted kid will do is they'll look at their peers, right? And they'll say this person did this and they're able to accomplish this. So I should be able to do that too. And so if you look at your neighbors who are building a shack and they're they went to Home Depot and they got 100 pounds of wood and they built their shack over a weekend. And then you go and get your 100 pounds of wood from Home Depot and you start brought to you by Home Depot, I suppose. And you start building your mansion, I know it sounds kind of weird, but 100 pounds of wood may be enough to build a shack, but it's nowhere near enough to build a mansion. And then what gifted kids will do is they'll look at the foundation that they've laid with 100 pounds of wood, and they'll be where is the I don't even have a shack. It's they look at what they've accomplished when they put in the same amount of energy as someone else, and they get really confused because this person has a complete shack over here, and I have barely the beginnings of a mansion. And so then that sort of negatively impacts them. They start to feel like they're actually inferior to these other people because they've been told, oh, you're smarter than the kid next door. Why the hell is the kid next door getting into college and you're not even getting into college? And so it all sort of compounds, right? Because even for the gifted kid, they're not trying to build a shack because they've been told they're gifted their entire life. So it's not enough to be average if you're gifted. So what you have to do is you try to, build a mansion because that's what you've been told that you're capable of. That's the expectation you set for yourself. And then you're left kind of scratching your head and wondering like why you don't even have a shack yet. Even though you studied for a month and they studied for a month, you're not getting as much as that they're getting. And it's kind of super bizarre, right? Because we just don't think about it that way. We think that if you're gifted, that means that everything should be easier for you. That it not only, they may need 100 pounds of wood to build a shack, but you should be able to build a shack in 50 pounds of wood. It should be easier for you, but it turns out paradoxically being harder. And then we sort of end up with kind of the final state of a gifted kid, which if we kind of think about it internally, is a state of like really shame and low self-esteem. So all this stuff kind of compounds, right? Like you're told you're smart, so you set this expectation of what you're capable of, like way up here. And then like, first grade goes by and you're up here. Second grade goes by and you're up here. Third grade goes by and you're up here. Boom, boom, boom. Fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. And then you kind of tank, right? And as you go to college, suddenly like you don't have the study skills involved. And now in the gap between what you're capable of and what you actually accomplish, this gap is where shame comes from. This is the shame gap that gifted kids inevitably fall into, which is when they fall short of what their expectations are. And this could be, once again, due to the fact that you're setting out to build a mansion and you ended up not even building a shack, right? So all of these discrepancies between your expectations and your accomplishments in that gap, and the bigger the gap is, the more it's filled with shame. So then what happens is kids are ashamed, right? Because they should be doing more. They should be doing better. And then like the shame then further compounds and makes it hard to find motivation. And this is where you kind of get burnout. So then like you have these gifted kids and you're like, hey man, just like go to a community college. You don't have to go to an Ivy League school. You don't have to go to like Harvard or Stanford or MIT. Just like go to your local community college. And in that comes a bunch of shame because you've been told your entire life that you're better than that, right? And so you start to develop this ego of being a super smart kid. And then this leads to avoidance of things because all you're left with is the identity of a smart kid. So you can never even bring yourself to go to community college because smart kids don't go to community college. In your mind, that's where the stupid kids go. And if you go to community college, then suddenly you've lived your entire life for 20 years being told you're a smart kid. It's your biggest strength. It's the one that everyone keeps talking about. And now like suddenly you have to relegate yourself to being a stupid kid. And in that gap is where the shame lives. In that gap is where the ego lives, okay? So it's really, really hard, right? Because you're set up with these expectations. People don't really acknowledge that because you're capable of a lot, it's actually going to take like a lot of work to take that potential and bring it to fruition, right? And that's the biggest thing is people just lose sight of the fact that building a mansion actually takes more work than building a shack. And your entire life, people have told you, like, you should build this mansion because that's what you're capable of. And so then we kind of get to, all right, so, like, what do we do about it, right? So if you're a gifted kid who's kind of perfectionistic and burnt out, and, like, society has sort of set you up this way, I'm not saying that you're not individually responsible as well, but I do think that there's a whole reason. So when we have, like, a generation of burnt out gifted kids, I think we have to be fair and be a little bit scientific and kind of acknowledge that this may not be, like, an individual problem, right? When we've got a generation of kids like this, like maybe there's something societal going on. And I think paradoxically, we sort of set these kids up to struggle. And so then the question becomes, okay, like what do we do about it? So the first thing you should do if you're a gifted kid is to stop comparison, right? Like comparison is the foundation of getting out of this problem. Because as long as you are comparing yourself, and this is part of the issue, is that if you think about the word gifted, what does the word gifted imply? It is a word that has no meaning outside of a comparative framework. You guys get that? The only way you can be gifted is if there are other people who are not gifted. And so essentially what happens is like the whole idea of a gifted kid only exists in relationship to another kid. And so what we find in the minds of gifted kids is that they're comparing themselves all the time. Oh, I don't want to go to community college. That's where the stupid people go. Oh, I don't know, like, why I can't do what my friend is capable of. Like, he's able to do so much. Why am I not able to do so much? I have an older sibling who did fantastic, and now I have big shoes to fill, right? There's so much comparison. All of the expectations that gifted kids have don't come from themselves, right? Because if you actually based your expectations on what you're capable of, you'd be capable of a B, C, D, or an F. That would be a realistic expectation. But instead, you create these artificial expectations that are based on comparison. And why do gifted kids do that? Because it starts with their parents. It starts with their teachers. We're all told that we're gifted, which is by definition a comparison to all of the other kids. And so then what happens is you're looking over at the shack, and you've got this blueprint for a mansion, and they give you some wood, and then you try to build the mansion, and like you don't even have a roof when this person has a completely built shack. And then you kind of look at yourself and like, man, I must be like a super idiot, right? Like, and it's so bizarre that when we set up this when we start with this framework of a comparison, we sort of doom ourselves to failure because there's like, it's never going to work because you can't ever base the expectations of your life and what you're capable of based on what someone else is doing, right? If someone else is happy studying chemical engineering, it doesn't mean that you're going to be happy studying chemical engineering. If somebody else is happy dating someone of the opposite sex, it doesn't mean that you're going to be happy dating someone of the opposite sex. The whole point is as humans, we're individuals. And if you're a gifted kid, the first thing you've got to do is let go of all comparison. So next thing is to recognize that your road is going to be a rough one, right? So like when someone sets out to build a mansion, they know in their mind that like this is going to take a while, right? You can't expect to build a mansion in the same amount of time it would take someone to build a shack. And so if you're a gifted kid and you expect a lot from yourself, okay, recognize that this is going to be a long road. And the greater your potential is, the longer it's going to take for you to get there. And this is something that I can understand in hindsight. Like, so I grew up as a gifted kid and was like in, the special classes or whatever. I actually still remember when I was in 8th grade, my grades started to dip. And when I went to high school, I didn't qualify based on my grades. Like my high school was like, yeah, he needs to be in like regular English. He can't be in like advanced English, or he doesn't meet the criteria for advanced English. And so my parents were really, really not happy with that because they have such a smart boy. He's just so smart. He just needs to apply himself. So they went to the school, and I remember having a meeting with the honors English teacher or whatever. And then he's like, do you want to be in this class? And I was like, yeah, I want to be in the class. And my parents were like, yeah, he belongs in the class. Right? And so the teacher was like, okay, fine. Because, you're not going to, there's some parents that could potentially be annoying. So you're like, whatever. And so I ended up being in the class that I really didn't belong in. I really didn't do very well, right? Because I didn't have the work ethic. But it propagates sort of this idea of like, you can handle it. So like I started off, going on the wrong track, kind of like in high school. It took me 5 years to graduate from college, right? With a 2.5 GPA. Took me another 3 or 4 years to even get into medical school. And so like my road has been long. And like, that's just sometimes what it takes if you're a gifted kid, right? You take the scenic route in life. So oftentimes people would ask me, like about stuff. When I started medical school and I saw friends of mine, right, who I was in high school with, they're already fully trained doctors and, flying around and all that good stuff. And I'm just like starting medical school. And I was like, yeah, I took the scenic route in life. And so recognize that if you're a gifted kid, like it's a long road. Like you're not going to do things faster. You're not going to build a mansion as fast as someone else is going to build a shack. The other thing to recognize about it being a long road, if you're a gifted kid, is don't expect to see the form of your mansion for a long time. When other people have built their shacks, you will still just have the foundation of the mansion. It's not going to have a roof for a long time. It's not going to have windows for a long time. So this is the other problem that gifted kids run into, is as they put in an equal amount of effort compared to their colleagues, they actually see less return on their investment. And that in turn shatters their motivation and makes them want to give up, right? Because I'm putting in all this effort and I'm still not seeing anything yet. So it's a long road. Be patient with yourself and try your best not to compare to other people. The last thing to kind of consider is the shame. So gifted kids oftentimes struggle a lot with self-esteem and shame, and that once again is because their expectations are up here and their performance is down here, right? And so in that gap is where your shame is going to live. And so as long as there is a gap in what you expect from yourself with what you accomplish, you will have shame. And the solution to that, oddly enough, is one of two ways, right? One is you can actually live up to the expectations that you have, right? So you can actually shoot up here and land up here. So you can go to an Ivy League school or whatever, right? You can do a tech startup or whatever. Like you can like do everything that everyone has always known you're capable of doing. So you can actually hit all of those metrics. That's one option. Then the shame will go away. Or what you can do is let go of your expectations and bring yourself down here, because the shame exists in the gap. So even if you accept yourself as being like sort of a failure, oddly enough, the shame will go away. And as you accept yourself as you are, which is not wasted potential, but like in the present, like you are everything that you're capable of. Everything that you've ever been capable of is exactly what you've achieved. And once you sort of take that attitude, bring your expectations down to here, you will be amazed at like what happens to your motivation and what you are truly capable of. But you can't achieve it as long as there is that shame gap, right? Like in terms of performance. So, questions. Anyway, so let me just kind of summarize. So I think that like, you know, we see this a lot where a lot of people are gifted and we think of that as an advantage. But like I was saying earlier, I think that, you know, sometimes being gifted comes with its own set of needs. And by properly addressing those needs, we can avoid some of these things like gifted kids, you know, feeling ashamed of themselves, gifted kids, you know, not like comparing themselves to like all the other normal kids and finding themselves lacking. And also that we have to kind of acknowledge that our school system is sort of set up in a particular way that oftentimes causes gifted kids to stumble. And through understanding like how a gifted kid, you know, a child who is gifted becomes an adult who's perfectionistic and burnt out, we have to understand that whole life cycle in order to sort of start taking steps to change it. Okay, so I'm sure you've been asked this question before and I've answered before, so feel free to tell me where I can find the answer to this question. How were you able to get accepted to Harvard Medical School, let alone medical school alone with such a low GPA, when that is such a critical deciding factor? How did I stand out? So that's a great question. So the short answer is, so I did some amount of graduate education. So I did a master's degree to boost my GPA. The second thing that I did, I didn't go to Harvard for medical school. I went to Tufts for medical school. And then I did my psychiatry training at Harvard, at Mass General, McLean Hospital. And so the short answer of like how I wound up there is like one step at a time. So you have to do, you know, and each of those things involved like a reality check or some degree of humility in terms of like thinking like I actually don't belong at Harvard. Like I'm never going to wind up there. I had to accept that, right? Let alone get into medical school. And the more that I accepted, like I did a lot of things that were, you know, humbling to say the least. I wouldn't quite say undignified, but I had to really let go of a lot of ego and like take one step at a time. It also took perseverance. I mean, I applied to 120 medical schools before I got into a single one. And that was the break that I needed. And then like understanding, having all that failure behind me, I really worked hard in medical school and really tried to excel. And then I actually did an away rotation, for those of you who don't know what that is, or for those of you who do know what that is. So I basically did an audition rotation at Harvard, which is like super competitive. You show up there with a bunch of other people who want to go there, and it's basically like a test. It's like a month-long test of what you're capable of. And I did really well. So thankfully I had set up, you know, a lot of good stuff over the last 8 years in terms of being myself and like owning the person that I was and not being ashamed of the fact that I failed. And, you know, recognizing that most of the other students who were auditioning were 4 years younger than I was, that I was actually older than some of the residents there, despite the fact that like they were evaluating me, right? So like there's someone 2 years younger who's like giving me a grade. So navigating all that stuff was difficult, but I did a good job at it and stayed focused. And that's how I wound up at Harvard. So I trained there for 4 years and that's where I'm faculty now. Right? But it's all about like letting go of the ego. How do you lower expectations? You lower expectations by accepting what you're capable of, like actually accepting. So the expectation and acceptance are at opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, so practicing acceptance is how you lower expectations. So let me give you guys an example. So the theme today is Jnana Yoga, right? So like, let me think about a Jnana Yoga exercise to let go of expectations. Let me just think about this for a second. So here's a good example of a Jnana Yoga exercise. Actually, I don't know if this is a good example. This is one of the ones that I feel less confident in. This is maybe a bad example of a Jnana Yoga exercise. So for the next month or 2 months, when you go to a restaurant and someone asks you what you want to order, just tell the waiter to surprise you. Just tell them, surprise me. And then pay attention to your enjoyment or lack of enjoyment of the food. Right? So when we go to restaurants, we have expectations. And if we think about the worst experience that you can have at a restaurant is not actually to have bad food. It's to expect really good food and get bad food. That's actually worse than getting bad food. If you know a restaurant is crap and you go there and you order something, the food that you get is crap, like what were you expecting? It's totally fine, actually. Right? We do that every day. Like if you go to a fast food, like McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever, like you're not expecting, like a gourmet meal. You're just expecting some like mediocre or arguably incredibly tasty, depending on whether you're getting a Mexican pizza or not, which you can't get anymore because they're out of, it's sad. But so like if you guys want to really understand, so this is the way that Jnana Yoga works. If you really want to understand expectation and acceptance, you have to put yourself in situations that are like free from expectation. And you can't put yourself in a situation because the expectation doesn't come from the situation, right? So it's even what I said was kind of wrong. You have to practice messing with your expectations. So go to a restaurant and just say, surprise me. Or you can ask if they don't know, like if they're taken aback, you can say, what's good here? Okay, I'll take that. Right? If you've got dietary restrictions, tell them about the dietary restrictions. And and then you're like, but what if I don't like the food that I get? Well, yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? So like, just eat what you get and see what happens. And they're like, but I don't like it. And it's like, yes. So like, pay attention to that and be like, how hard is it for you to order food that you're not going to like, or you order without expectations? What's it like to go to a restaurant and accept that you're going to just get some random pile of food that could be amazing and could be something that you really dislike? That's how you gain acceptance. That's how you let go of expectations, by literally going to a restaurant and like actively letting them go. That is the Jnana Yoga. And then you may discover all kinds of cool things, right? You may even discover, for example, that if you go to the restaurant and you expect crap, if you're like, this is going to be an absolute train wreck, I'm going to have to go home and like have a bowl of cereal after the meal. It'll be really interesting how much you enjoy your meal. It'll be really interesting because in that moment, what you're doing is letting go of the expectation, right? And then like suddenly, even if you get crap, it's not a big deal. And if you get something delicious, it's like such a huge win. And that's what it means to let go of expectation. The more you let go of expectation, the more you start to enjoy life and the better life gets. It's kind of bizarre. So literally, if you guys want a Jnana Yoga practice to let go of expectations and earn acceptance, and you can't just do this once, right? So you can't like wuss out of it. You have to do it for a month, presuming you're going to go out to eat, and you can afford that and all that good stuff. Otherwise, like make it 3 months, like, do it for a while, like commit yourself. This is my life now. GG. Get wrecked, noobs. So try it. You guys want to learn Jnana Yoga? Try it. Okay, so someone else is asking, how should a parent, teacher, or manager support the special needs of gifted people if what's happening now is bad? That's a great question. So I'll give you an example. So sometimes I get parents that come into my office. They have a kid who's addicted to video games. Why is a kid addicted to video games? Really simple. Because video games match the pace of the child. Right? That's why gifted kids, in a nutshell, the reason that gifted kids get addicted to video games is one very, very, very simple reason. It can all be reduced to this. Games match the pace of the child and school doesn't. So you've got a kid, goes to school, gets a worksheet, does the worksheet. I still remember, I had this experience. I skipped the first grade. So this is what happened. I went to a school where, I'd do a worksheet and then like they'd give me another one. And so in my first day of first grade, I moved schools. I gave them, I got a worksheet. I did the worksheet. I gave it back to them. And I said, can I have the next one? And she's like, what do you mean the next one? It's like the next one, like whatever's next. Like I'm done with this. We've got class for another 45 minutes. I'm done with this. Can I have the next one? She's like, there is no next one. I'm like, what? And then it didn't take long where like, she gave me then she evaluated me and I got moved up a grade, but same problem there. And then eventually like what heck is like school moves at the pace of like the slowest person. Now here's the really addictive thing about a video game. Now imagine you're just bored at school because it's moving at a snail's pace, right? Because there's like other 6-year-olds and like you're a 6-year-old too, and maybe you're a little smarter than the other 6-year-olds. Now enter a video game. What happens when you don't beat level 1? You replay level 1. And what happens when you beat level 1? You go straight to level 2. And if you beat level 2, you go straight to level 3. You beat level 3, you go straight to level 4. So games perfectly match the challenge that a human being is capable of, right? If you get stuck on a boss in Dark Souls, like you don't get to move past the boss because your parents make a phone call to From Software and they're like, hey, my son is really good at video games. Can you please advance him past this boss and stick him to the next boss? It's like, you can't do that in Dark Souls. Like Dark Souls doesn't give a shit, right? So like kids get addicted to video games because they perfectly match what you're capable of, which is exactly what kids like. There's this whole thing called intent to mastery. We teach all this stuff to parents and things like that. So what do you do if you've got a kid who's gifted? You challenge them and you don't rely on school to do it for you. So when parents come to me and they're like, I have a kid who's addicted to video games. He's 16. He thinks school is, I ask him, okay, what do you think about school? He's like, school's boring. And then what I do is I make a couple of phone calls and I'm like, we're going to this was back when I was in Boston. There's a lot of cool startups in Boston. So what I'll do is we'll make some phone calls. We'll stick them in an internship somewhere. Like we'll take some college level internship at some kind of startup. So like we'll look around at like incubators from like MIT or whatever, like Harvard. We'll be like, hey, like there's a kid. Do you guys have any internship opportunities available? And we'll stick him there. And he'll work there for the summer. And it like turns the kid right around. No more video games. Because he's actually like learning. So I stuck one kid in this startup that there was an app. You take a picture of a mole on your body and it tells you the percentage chance that the mole is cancerous. Right? So we stick the kid there. And we're like, go help them. And then like sometimes the kid is like, what am I supposed to do? Like you start by getting him a coffee. And then maybe you'll learn something. And then it's actually fantastic. Like they do really well. You challenge them, right? And because the cool thing is that a lot of the startup folks, they sort of recognize, because some of them are like misfits too. So they're like, okay, there's like a kid here, like let's put him to work. Because they recognize that, okay, you're 16, so you know how to like manage SQL databases. And the kid is like, no. They're like, Google it and learn, and then you're going to manage our SQL database next week. And the kid is like, what? And they're like, yeah. And then suddenly the kid is like, goes home, he's not playing video games, he's like reading about SQL databases or whatever, right? Just stick them into it and challenge them. So as a parent, or a teacher, like I'd say, like ask them. So here's the biggest mistake that parents and teachers make with gifted children is that when a gifted child fails, what we tend to do is slow down. Instead, what you need to do is speed up. It's absolutely terrifying. So if a gifted child is failing, what they need more than anything else is a bigger challenge, not like an easier environment. Now you have to make sure for a couple of other things, like you need to make sure there's not ADHD going on, depression going on, learning disabilities or other things like that going on. But in the absence of all of those things, challenge them more, not less. Ask them to do more, put them in positions of leadership, right? And just push them. Because like it's so fulfilling when you're take a kid in that situation and you're like, you're going to need to do this thing. And they're like, I can't do that thing. And you're like, okay, so then fail, but try. If you fail, like no big deal, but I'm not going to expect less of you. I know it's kind of paradoxical, but we just talked about letting go of expectation. But it's not really expectations. It's really having faith in them. It's a subtle difference. But be like, I have faith in you. I think you can handle it. So like, give it your best shot. That's what you do. You challenge them. Respect them instead of expect things from them. Okay, next one. Oh my God. Yeah, so if you guys are also like kind of wondering, like this is kind of, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but that's sort of like how we started the coaching program, right? Is like we just put a call out to Twitch chat and we're like, hey, there are a lot of people in the world that need your help. Who's going to help us? And people applied and they're like, I'm not a therapist. And we're like, you don't need to be. We have faith in you. We're going to give you some resources. We're going to teach you a lot of stuff about like how the human mind works. And like, if you put your mind to it and you show up every day and you try to help other people, like we have faith that you'll be able to do it. These are people with like crappy GPAs, 24 years old, haven't had a job in 2 or 3 years. And you put faith in them. And like our coaches are phenomenal. They're fantastic. They do such a good job. We get like messages every day from clients that are really, really happy with like what's going on. They don't realize that they think their coach is some amazing human being. They are amazing human beings. It's just you're not going to see it potentially on their resume. Some of them also have amazing resumes, but we just have faith in people, and they're fantastic. Like really, our outcomes are really good. Hopefully, we'll be publishing those in like 6 months or so. Our outcomes are really good, and it's because our coaches are really good. Okay, next question. All right. Just make sure. Okay. I've wasted 6 years towards working towards a degree. I hate chemistry. I'm also terrified of dropping out. So hi, some background info. I used to be a straight A student in high school, but didn't have any interests to pursue in university. So I applied to chemistry because it was my highest grade. I have spent 6 long years in university for a program I have zero interest in and quite frankly despise being in. During these 6 years, I've taken many different subjects for my electives in hopes of finding something I'm passionate about: math, biology, kinesiology, psychology, philosophy. None of them really clicked for me. But now I'm considering a full switch into computer science, which would require me to switch schools since my GPA is low. Uh-oh. My problem is I'm incredibly ashamed of how much time I've sunk. Oh, look. It's almost like this is a test case, chat. My problem is I'm incredibly ashamed of how much I've sunk into this degree that's made me extremely miserable. My peers are all graduated. There's the comparison. Some have jobs. Some are starting a family. Some about to complete their master's programs. Meanwhile, I feel anxious and depressed being where they were 6 years ago. It feels so difficult to leave it since it's really all I've had in the past 6 years. I don't know if I'm capable of going into a new degree and starting fresh at the age of 24, but I also know I'll hate my life if I stay. I'm also afraid of how my parents may react when I tell them I've wasted so much money in tuition, rent, etc. My parents worked extremely hard, and I feel extremely grateful that they helped me pay for my college funds. I feel this pressure to succeed and provide for them like they did for me, but at the same time, I've come to a point where my mental health is crumbling and I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. My parents don't know I'm struggling with these thoughts, but even sharing problems with them would make me feel like a failure or disappointment. I don't really know what it is I think I'll gain from posting this. Maybe I just wanted to vent and hear other people's thoughts. P.S. Never been to therapy, thought of going to one provided by the school, but I've heard they treat students with rude and with little respect. Okay. So, let's talk about this. All right. So this is the case of what seems like a 24-year-old who has been in college for 6 years studying chemistry, feels obligated to stay and finish their degree, really hates their degree, is burnt out, has some of the gifted syndrome kind of stuff going on, right? So A's early on, crappy GPA in college, a shame gap that is based on what they're expecting of themselves and what they're capable of, has a lot of comparison. So what's going on in this person? And why are more and more people at the age of 22 or 24 struggling to finish college and like not sure what to do? They feel like trapped between continuing this thing that they've already invested so much in versus kind of giving up. And then like, if you give up, like that's the last nail in the coffin, then you've really given up. And then like, you haven't really wasted those 6 years, right? Until you give up. So this is the tricky thing about this situation. Let's just talk about that for a second. If you finish, The last 6 of your years of your life haven't been a waste, right? It just took you better late than never. It's not like you wasted 6 years, because at least they're counting towards something. It took you a couple other years, but at least you didn't waste it. Whereas giving up, which is what you want to do more than anything else, means that you've wasted those 6 years. So now we really understand why this person is stuck. Because every day they continue, they haven't given up. And if they haven't given up, they haven't wasted 6 years of their life. So they propagate, they stay in this dead career path, this dead major, for the sake of not wasting 6 years of their life. And in doing so, they've wasted 6 years of their life, right? Because now if you're giving up, this person probably had those thoughts like even before they picked the major. But they sort of kept like plowing forward, like because out of avoidance of giving up and wasting all of that time. Because it's all wasted if I give up. And so this is the biggest problem, right? So this is how kids nowadays, I guess this person isn't a kid, end up in what I call an early life crisis. So a lot of times people talk about midlife crises, right? And traditionally people will usually talk about men, and what'll happen is like dudes will get their hair colored, like sometimes they'll go through a divorce, they'll have an affair, or even if they don't have an affair or go through a divorce, they'll buy like some really expensive car that, you know, has a retractable roof. They'll drive around, and this is like the midlife crisis, right? So what we're seeing time and time again is what I would call the early life crisis. And there's like a generation of people having an early life crisis. And this is a classic example of this. Like, I picked a major for all the wrong reasons, or I picked a career because I thought it would be safe or good or whatever. I'm just deeply, deeply unhappy in it. I'm burnt out. I can't continue, but I can't stop. Because if I stop, it'll be a waste. And they're stuck. So this is the early life crisis. So why is this happening more than it used to? So what used to happen with a midlife crisis is you got a lot of reassurance that, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what, it'll get better at the end. It'll get better at the end. It'll get better at the end. And so you're kind of like blind, right? Like you're just kind of like your vision is like focused and forward. You kind of just chugging along. It'll get better. I'll be happy one day. Like once I'm done with school, I'll get a job, then I'll be happy. Once you get the job, once I get promoted, I'll be happy. Because we're just told by everyone that you'll be happy in the future. You'll be happy in the future. You'll be happy in the future. And then you try that for a while, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. And then you kind of hit this midlife crisis where you're like, this is not the life that I wanted, right? I took all the right steps and I ended up in the wrong place. And then you have this midlife crisis. I'm 40 years old. Like, how can I start over? How do I find joy? What happens? Sometimes you get divorced. Sometimes you start dating a 25-year-old. Like, you know, there are all kinds of things that mark the midlife crisis. So nowadays what we have is the early life crisis. And why is that? I think it's because there's an increased awareness that didn't used to be there. So if we look at the big difference between like 40 years ago and today, there's a dissemination of awareness. I mean, a dissemination of information and an increased awareness of like where things are heading. Because people are communicating more now, right? So this person is posting this thing because they've seen other people post similar thoughts. So there's almost like a permission to explore these feelings, to have these feelings. We're all kind of more cosmically aware that like if we put our heads down and plow forward, we're not guaranteed success. That's the promise we were given like 30, 40 years ago. That's the promise of my generation, the millennial generation. The promise we were given is that if you put your head down and you work really hard, you'll be happy. Turned out that wasn't the case. And so my generation, the millennials, like we all sort of suffered for a while, right? Like we're trying to figure this out. And then like the generation beneath us recognizes they're so much more self-aware than they've ever been. They're so much more aware that like life on autopilot is not going to bring you happiness. So people start to question more. They start to wonder more. They start to like recognize like, oh, I'm burnt out. Like this is becoming more of a thing. And so we have early life crises. So here's my experience as a psychiatrist. Having an early life crisis is way better than having a midlife crisis. So in a weird way, I think this is actually healthy for our society. So when I was struggling, 24 years old, had just graduated from college and couldn't get a job, had applied to medical school, got 40 rejections, couldn't get a job as a research assistant. Like I didn't know what I was doing with my life. Like I wasn't doing anything. So I had to do a lot of hard soul searching. And thankfully I did that soul searching when I was like 24 and then like figured things out by the time I was 28. And then it was fine because I'd sort of figured everything out. And I don't think I'm headed towards a midlife crisis. Right? So I'm almost 40 now, but I'm not, generally speaking, things are going pretty good. So I don't think I'm going to wake up in 3 years and be like, I made a mistake. Where did my life go? I'm pretty happy with how things have gone. And I do think that I would have been very unhappy if I hadn't gone through that process. So this is the thing. If y'all are in an early life crisis, I think there are a couple of really important things to recognize. The first is to recognize that what you're going through is actually quite common. And it's actually really important. That the early life crisis is a voice within you that's actually trying to guide you. You're not wasting your life by giving up on chemistry. You're starting to live your life. So there are a couple of things that are really important to recognize here. One is that this person, we tend to only value things that move towards our final goal. So for me, for example, I'm not really much of a clinician now, right? I do maybe, 5 to 10 hours of patients per week. But it took me years and years of seeing patients to realize that, it's not actually my favorite thing in the world. And so sometimes I think what we underestimate is the value of education. So what I mean by education is not what you learn in school, but spending 6 years of your life to discover what you truly love or look for what you truly love and realize that, oh, I'm not going to changing majors is not the solution to finding what I truly love. That's a very, very important discovery, because what it means is that no major will satisfy you. So you shouldn't pick your major based on satisfaction. You need to start looking for satisfaction in other ways. Maybe CS will be in the right direction. This is the other thing, is because we expect our majors or our careers or our classes to fulfill us. Whereas learning that your major is not going to give you fulfillment is actually a very, very important lesson. Why is that? Because that changes your expectations. Okay, I'm not going to find my passion in college, so I might as well pick something I know it's going to suck. I'm not expecting it to be anything better than that. You let go of your expectations and you'll start enjoying it. So it's the price of education. It's the price of learning. And you have a midlife crisis, you have an early life crisis. So I think the best thing to do if you're in an early life crisis is kind of listen to yourself. Recognize also that you haven't necessarily wasted time. You just spent time learning what you didn't like, right? So finding your favorite food is not about just eating your favorite food, right? It's about trying lots of different things until you find something that you like. Finding the right person, assuming that you're into monogamy and all that good stuff, you want to get married, right? So it's sort of it's a value system that I'm assuming there. Finding the right person to marry involves looking through a lot of wrong people, right? That's just how it works. And so something about the way that we judge ourselves when it comes to life is that the only thing that the benchmark that we set ourselves up against is perfection. 4.0 in high school, 4.0 in college, off to start your own company or go to law school or get an MBA, and then I'm going to go VP of this at this place. Then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to get stock options, then I'm going to go here and I'm going to start my own company, and I'm going to retire at 45. Right? We expect nothing but perfection from ourselves. There's no time in our plan for life for detours or learning things or figuring things out. We just expect ourselves to just think about how absurd this is. We expect 18-year-old kids who have never been in college and have no idea what they want to do with their life to pick a major that sort of commits them to a career path. What the hell? How on earth are you supposed to get an 18-year-old to commit to a career path? They've never done anything. But this is the way that society exists. They ask you to make commitments, and then you get into the sunk cost fallacy, right? Where it's throwing good money after bad. Well, I did chemistry because it's the best score that I had, so I might as well do something I'm good at. And then you are doing chemistry for 1 year, and you're well, it's not like I like anything else, so let me continue chemistry. You do chemistry for 2 years. Well, I'm not really liking this so much. Let me try kinesiology. Let me try physiology. It's not like I like any of those things. I guess I'll stick with chemistry. Year 4. I don't actually like chemistry, so I'm going to drop half these classes. I can't motivate myself year 5, year 6. And it's what else am I going to do? I don't know. So I might as well just keep doing this. So it's terrifying, the situations that we put people in. And so now what's happening is there's a raised awareness of this. People are realizing oh, other people are unhappy too. It's actually okay to be unhappy. So then they post things like this, and then you have an early life crisis. What do I want to do with my life? That's what our entire audience is. It's a group of people having an early life crisis. And because, we have more than 5 viewers, it seems like it's a societal problem, which is totally okay. So I had an early life crisis. I thought it was fantastic. I think it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I would be so miserable if I got into medical school right away, because then I would have become a cardiologist or a surgeon or something like that, because it was all about ego. I would have been embarrassed to become a psychiatrist, even though it's what I love. I'd have been like, that's not a real doctor. Like, people aren't going to like be like, oh, psychiatrist is not a real doctor. You know, like all that stupid ego stuff would have dictated my life. And I would have been miserable. I'd have been rich and miserable. Instead, I'm streaming on Twitch and wearing a hoodie. And this is my work for the day. Right? And so I know it's terrifying, but like, take the time that you need to figure out the things that you need to figure out. Very practically, if you have to have conversations with your parents, you have conversations with your parents. And like what you tell your parents is, look, I've tried my level best to make this work. I'm just incredibly unhappy. And, you know, I don't really think that like this is going to work for me. It's going to be tough, you know? And like, I'm trying to figure out how to honor your sacrifice. I'm trying to figure out how to do something that I can repay everything that you've done for me with, but I just don't think it's chemistry. And I need some time to try to figure that out. And I'd like to like explore what to do with my life. I tried living on autopilot for far too long and it's just not working. And this is the key thing that you really have to understand. When it comes to having an early life crisis, it is the avoidance of the crisis. It is the avoid. For some reason, my 6-year-old just threw a measuring tape. You need something? What the? She just threw a measuring tape into the room and then opened it up and took the measuring tape back. I'm so confused. All right, what was I saying? Remind me, chat. Oh, yeah. So for all these people who are in early life crises, here's the key thing to remember. It's the avoidance of the conflict that keeps you paralyzed and stuck on autopilot, right? So in this person, it's like coming to terms with like dropping out of college kept you majoring in chemistry. Coming to terms with disappointing your parents is too hard. So you're not going to say anything to them because even telling them you're going to feel like a failure. So it's the avoidance of that conflict which keeps you in autopilot because you're like sticking your head in the sand and you're like, this is not working anymore, but I can't change it. I can't disappoint people. I can't quit. I can't do any of those things, even though every fiber of my being is telling me to do those things. And so internally you're tortured. You're stuck. You're being pulled in two different directions. You're being torn apart because you want to avoid the negative consequence. You want to avoid the conflict. You're scared of what your parents will say or think. So instead of actually fixing the problem, all you do is pretend that everything is okay. So your parents don't realize, we can't let them know that you're not really enjoying yourself. They may have put 2 and 2 together because first of all, they're your parents. And secondly, you've been in undergrad for 6 years. So they may know something is up. But let's not worry about that right now. Right? It's recognizing that internally you're not willing to like grieve or give up or mourn the price of what you've done. So you say stay stuck. And then year 7 goes by, year 8 goes by, year 9 goes by. And if you do that for a while, then you end up with a midlife crisis. That's what all the people with midlife crises were doing. They would just keep plowing forward to avoid conflict and don't accept what's actually wrong in your life. Don't try to do anything about it. Just pretend that everything is okay. It's like the band continuing to play when the Titanic is sinking. Just pretend the problem doesn't exist. I'm not listening. La, 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 la. Right? So it's really challenging to confront your fears. So now we're going to give you a Jnana Yoga practice for that. You guys may think that, oh, path of knowledge, that's great. I don't actually have to sit down and meditate. Like I can just think my way to enlightenment. Absolutely, my friend. The path of knowledge is for you. So you guys ready for your path of knowledge practice for if you have an early life crisis and you're avoiding conflict and don't want to admit to yourself that your life is empty and on autopilot? Here it is. The next time you go out to eat, when a waiter asks you, how is your food? Complain. That is the practice. Say, hey, if there's anything wrong with your food, don't just like complain just because. If there's anything you don't like about your food, it needs a little bit more salt, needs a little bit more sauce, has too much sauce, just complain. Just be like, you know, it's not the best, to be honest. If you don't think, if you give it like a 7 out of 10, tell them, you know, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I think it needs to do this, this, and this. Do it politely. Don't be an asshole. You know, don't be a Karen. Just be honest. Just tell them. honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed. It's kind of undercooked in the middle. Tell them, right? Be respectful, be kind, be compassionate, but be honest. And then that's where it's kind of like, yeah, don't lie. I'm not telling you guys to lie. I'm just saying if there's some problem with your food, just tell your waiter or waitress. Right? No, it's not being a douchebag. So if you're disrespectful about it, that's being a douchebag. If you blame the waiter and be like, oh, blah, 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 throw a temper tantrum. If you're like, no, you can, if they ask you, how's your food? Just answer the question that they asked you. Right? That's all I'm saying you should do. And if you like it, then you can say that too. Just tell them honestly what you think about the food. And now notice within yourself what happens when you start to do that. Because what is this a practice of? Why is this jnana yoga? Why is this a meditation practice? Is Dr. K just trying to make you feel uncomfortable? Well, yeah, that's a little bit of that. But what it really is recognizing when I feel something on the inside and I hold it in for the sake of ruffling other people's feathers. That's how you get into an early life crisis like this. Because you're so conflict avoidant that you can't even own something as simple as my sandwich has too much tomato. You know, like that's all. And so practice. This is what jnana yoga is. What happens within you, and then pay attention. What makes it hard to do? What makes it easy to do? How is it received by other people? Can you vocalize what you truly feel internally, even if it sets someone up to feel a little bit bad? Because here's the really cool thing. So if you guys are afraid of making people feel bad, you know, if you get something and it's not what you, if you really want to be nasty about it, if you want to be like Slytherin style, then you can like, when you order something and then tell them you ordered something else. And like, that's lying though. But, you know, I don't think you should do something like that. And because here's the cool thing is like oftentimes chefs and waiters will like want to fix it for you, right? And so you let them fix it for you, then you can give them honest feedback. You can be like, hey, this is so much better. I really appreciate it. Oh yeah, just like that side of sauce really fixed things. Can I get some ketchup? Oh, the ketchup actually fixes it. Thank you so much. Right? You can be a good person. I'm not saying don't be a good person. You don't have to be an evil person, but be honest. This is jnana yoga. To be honest with the people around you, be authentic with yourself, and do so in a compassionate way. And if you are it's so hard for you to do that, because then that's why we pick it, right? Jnana yoga is like, it's not as easy as just sitting there and breathing. So jnana yoga is actually regarded as the hardest path to enlightenment. And so there are a bunch of people out there like you thinking, oh, I have such high IQ, I can do path of knowledge, easy peasy. No. It's the path of contemplation. It's not the path of information. Jnana yoga is not gained just by reading books. It's gained by the application of what you read into like experiments on the self. So give it a shot. There's your jnana yoga practice, okay? All right. Jnana, so it's spelled, it's confusing because it doesn't have a great, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff. Once again, if you guys are curious about this, there's a lot of stuff in Dr. K's guide. Yeah, it's not Neon Cat, but similar. Okay. Okay. Let's do the next one. Okay. Nope. 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 There we go. So, how to deal with an aggressive teenager addicted to video games, right? So this is a good one, right? Hey, hi, Dr. K. I need advice on what to do with my younger brother, 17. He is autistic, but attends regular school with a decent performance. He didn't get any special education, but we made efforts to be understanding for his difficulties. Before the pandemic, he was socially inept, but still had a good relationship with us. With the start of the pandemic, he got a phone and became addicted to video games, and his behavior changed. He locks himself in his room all day, barely eats, yells loudly for hours on end while playing PvP games. He also uses very foul language and often punches or throws objects violently. His shouting doesn't stop at night and doesn't allow anyone to sleep. parents and 4 siblings. When confronted about his behavior, even by a simple knock on the door to remind him to lower his voice, he goes into fits of rage and blames it all on us, saying we should leave him alone until he calms down, which sometimes takes hours to days, which is an inconvenience. Last year, he ran away from home, and sometimes he threatens to do it again. And when he puts down his video games, he becomes a little more open to discussion and promises to change and says he understands the problem. However, a few minutes later, he goes back to video games and forgets all of that, and all the shouting, cursing, disrespectful speech resumes. My father gave up on him and doesn't want to take him to a mental health professional. I am an unemployed college student, so I can't do that myself. How should I talk to my brother? Should I ask for outside help? P.S. I'd be overjoyed if Dr. K saw this. I saw it, but but if he didn't, would appreciate any advice. I think y'all should check out the advice in the thread as well. Thank you to Dr. K and thank you to the wonderful community. So this is a hard one. So let me think about this. I'm just thinking, chat. 1 second. So we get a lot of posts about people asking, what can I do in this situation? And sometimes, for parents and stuff, I think that there's a lot more that they can do. But a lot of the posts that we get are from like siblings who are like, hey, my younger brother or sister or whatever has a problem. What can I do to support them? We also get a lot of posts from people like asking about friends, right? They'll say, oh, my friend is struggling with depression. Like, what can I do? What can I do? My friend or partner is suicidal. Like, I don't know how to support them. We get a lot of requests for people asking, what can I do in situations where they're not really empowered to do much? So the first thing that you've got to do if you're in a situation like this is, first of all, recognize like what you're empowered to do and what you're not empowered to do. And this in and of itself is like oftentimes a place that people get tripped up because they want to do so much, right? Your desires, you care about your brother, you really want to try hard. Like the amount of energy or will that you have to help him is actually potentially outweighed by what you're actually capable of. And we see this a lot in medicine, right? So sometimes, you'll see this, like I tend to think about things like cancer, where, people are willing to do everything within their power. They're willing to take any medicine. They're willing to do this. They're willing to do that. You have lots of doctors that are, willing to go above and beyond to try to save this patient's life. And at the end of the day, you just may not be able to. So you can want something a lot, especially as a sibling. You can care about your brother. You can love your brother. But one of the first things that it's difficult to do is to accept that you cannot fix this problem. You can try to help him by all means, but you have to start out of the gate recognizing that, there's only so much you can do as an older sibling who's unemployed and in college. And that's your karma. That's not really up to you, right? You can't magically be their parent. Some siblings will try, right? So some siblings will get parentified once their parents check out and they become responsible for younger siblings. So ultimately, the first thing, and this is where we also it comes back to dharma and karma. So what's your dharma? What's your duty in this situation? And what's your karma? What are you actually capable of? What's your circumstance? So I know it's kind of hard, but the first thing you've got to really do is think through those things. Like, what is your what is the responsibility of an older sibling to a younger sibling? What's the responsibility of a 22-year-old to a 17-year-old? First thing to think about. And furthermore, what are you capable of? Because you're gonna beat yourself up and you're gonna feel ashamed of yourself, and it's gonna be so terrible, because you love your brother so much and you want to do so much for him, but if you're not able to, you're gonna just tear yourself apart internally and you're gonna blame yourself, which is not gonna help anyone. So that's the first thing, is to recognize, basically, I'm gonna assume that you have essentially no real power in this situation. Like, for example, as an older sibling, you can't take away his video games, right? Like, I'm assuming you can't do that. You may not understand health insurance or whatever. I don't know what country you're in, but you may not be able to take him to because he's a minor, so he's 17, so you may not be able to take him to a medical doctor or a therapist because you're not his guardian, right? So there are a lot of things that you can't do, which it sounds like your brother needs. So let's get on to that. So the first thing is, I'm so sorry that your dad seems to have mentally checked out and is unwilling to take him to see a therapist, because I think essentially what needs to happen in this situation is that your parents need to take responsibility. And furthermore, it's not their fault, but like they're probably not equipped to deal with something like this. So this is where, sometimes we'll say, hey, like you guys should sign up for coaching. Coaching can help with this. When it comes to something like this, and even within our parent coaching, we have this issue. Well, when it comes to the intersection of autism spectrum and addiction, especially video game addiction, I really think that having a real mental health professional involved is like really what you need. So remember that autism spectrum has such a constellation of symptoms. So we do see things like emotions that get out of control very quickly. We do see less control over addictive behaviors. We see meltdowns, behavioral disturbances, things like that. There are also different kinds of communication problems. So, in the worst cases, we have people on the autism spectrum that are nonverbal and really don't communicate at all. Then we have people on high functioning autism that can go to school and things like that and have conversations, but their internal ability to become aware of their actions and behaviors may be pretty low. So they'll make promises, but as soon as the game turns on, everything goes out the window. They're not capable of remembering the promise that they made. Their mind can't remind them, hey, remember we promised this thing. So this is where working with a professional is so important, because ideally the professional will understand and map out for the family what the child can and can't handle. And then ideally what you need to do is set up a very strict boundary plan around gaming usage, right? And what I'm sort of hearing in this situation is that there are essentially no boundaries being set on the child because the child really flips out. And so since everyone is walking on eggshells around the child, you're propagating a lot of bad behavior that is getting worse and worse, and no one is putting a check on the bad behavior, so it's just going to grow out of proportion, right? It's kind of like, if I have an ant mound in my front yard and I don't do anything to stop the ants, the ant mound will keep growing. It'll be an infestation. If I've got termites in my house and I don't do anything to stop them, it'll just keep growing. So behaviors will continue to grow or be shaped by the video games until someone sets some kind of limit. And this is where promises, extracting a promise from someone, is not setting a limit. So setting a limit is about having some kind of behavioral consequence when a certain kind of behavior happens. Extracting a promise is insufficient. So this is what we see, back when I worked in an addiction rehab, I'd have some patients who made lots of promises for many years. They're like, yeah, I promise I'll quit drinking. My last drink, I swear, I'll never do it again. Promise after promise after promise. For year after year after year. And they're not lying. They're very genuine in that moment, right? They really do believe it. They're remorseful. Month goes by, 3 months go by, 6 months go by. And then kind of just sort of forget, right? It's like making a New Year's resolution. The day that you make a New Year's resolution, I'm going to cut out soda for 2022, GG, no more soda. You really mean it. There's a lot of motivation there, right? Just over time, the mind is kind of tricky. It sort of forgets. It kind of, a little bit. Every once in a while is okay. It doesn't matter. I'm eating cookies anyway. So what's the difference between cookies and soda? If I'm going to eat some sugar, sometimes I just enjoy a soda more than a cookie. There are all kinds of rationalizations that, mind gets distracted. You go back to the behavior. So why do people show up at rehab? Because their partner's like, I'm going to divorce you. I'm done with this. Either you go to rehab or I'm done. So 30% of people that have been, rough estimate, okay, I don't have real data on this, but I want to say that 30% of people that I took care of, or patients at rehabs that I've worked at, were undergoing a divorce or separation. So there has to be a consequence in order to drive the behavior. And the problem is if you're 22 years old and you've got a 17-year-old, I don't know that you can drive that consequence. And if your parents are mentally checked out, I think you guys, it's a really hard uphill battle. I don't think you're going to be able to fix it on your own, bluntly. So this is what we do in parent coaching is we'll help parents work with their children with autism and set limits. And even then, especially in the cases of autism, we also recommend real mental health, professional mental health help, specifically because when it comes to autism, it's such a heterogeneous manifestation that there isn't like a playbook for autism. If any of y'all have autism or you have a family member with autism, you understand that there's no playbook for autism. Autism in and of itself has so many different presentations. And so setting up the right kind of behavioral plan for someone with autism requires you understanding where their deficits are and where their strengths are, right? And so, for example, just one simple example is like, generally speaking, people with autism do better with concrete communication. So like setting very firm limits that are like super concrete. It's not like get good grades. Like that's too abstract. So you have to be like, you have to study for a minimum of 2 hours a day and get scores higher than 90. And if you don't do that, we will reduce your gaming time by this amount. So it needs to become like a very strict kind of behavioral plan. Then I think this is where, I hate to say it, chat, but sometimes we do help your parents set better limits on you, which I think is something that y'all appreciate over time. So that we've heard on stream as well from guests. We've heard, like burnt out gifted kids say, yeah, I wish my parents, were stricter on me. Like I wish they forced me to study when I was a kid so that I knew how to study as an adult. So sometimes we really encourage hard limit setting. And so when it comes to autism, I think as a 22-year-old, I just don't know how much you're capable of, because if you guys have decided that you're not going to seek mental health help and your dad is basically mentally checked out and you guys aren't going to set limits on the kid, I don't know what you can do as a 22-year-old. You can ask him. You can say, hey, like, what do you think about your gaming? It's disruptive for me. But I think getting him to a therapist and maybe talking to your parents about like, hey, I'm worried, like maybe the best thing you can do is talk to your parents and say, hey, I'm worried about my brother. Like, I think this is getting worse. What do y'all think? And then your parents are going to say like, yeah, it's getting worse, but we don't know what to do. And that's when you can say, okay, so if you don't know what to do, I don't know what to do either. Generally speaking, when you don't know what to do, maybe we should go consult a professional because it's their job to know what to do. Right? I don't think that he's like ill or anything, and it's not like you guys are doing a bad job, but it just feels to me like we're outgunned in this situation. So maybe we need to get a little bit of help. And I think if you can really win over your parents and get them to a professional, that'll be like the first step. Questions? Okay, so we got a random question, which I like. But, so Dr. K, a communication question. How do you improve verbal fluency, i.e. speaking smoothly and finding the right words to use to communicate effectively? Struggle more when nervous or trying to sound smart to senior colleagues? Perhaps read more books, write more, any meditation? You seem very fluent. No, so books, writing more, and meditation is not what you need to do. What you need to do is practice your communication, right? So this is where, like, even before this question, I just paused and collected my thoughts. So I think a couple of key tips if y'all want to be more effective communicators. Being an effective communicator is not a race. So it's okay to take some time. I found that rather than people thinking that you're like slow, it actually means that you're like thoughtful and you're considering things carefully. So I think it's fine to take some time to organize your thoughts, and just practice is the most important thing to communicate. To recognize that communication is a skill, right? So you can really try to find the right word for particular situations. So I spend that's like the skill that I practiced for like 6 years. So even on stream now, I think carefully about like what I'm going to say. And so you just spend time thinking on it and just practice talking to people. When you're feeling nervous, what tends to happen is you tend to go to like default communication, and it's hard to kind of think outside of the box with the words that you're going to use. I think the other thing about fluency in communication is you have to have clarity of thought for fluency of communication. So if you're like talking to if you're talking to senior colleagues, so here are a couple of tips, okay? If you want to communicate effectively in the workplace, for example, or at school, a couple of things. First is don't try to sound smart. Trying to sound smart is like false. authentically represent what you understand. If you're trying to trick someone into thinking you're smart by using particular language, you're setting yourself up for failure. So in my experience, the people who sound the smartest are the ones who genuinely understand and communicate authentically. So that leads to the second point. Clarity of thought leads to clarity of communication. So in group therapy or family therapy or whatever, right? So if I'm doing couples counseling, what I'll try to help people do is understand themselves. And if they understand themselves, they're able to articulate more effectively with their partner. So clarity of understanding must come before clarity of communication. And so take the time that you need. You can even pause and like even say, so I'll say, hey, can I think for a second? But you guys can also say, like, if you're talking to a superior and they ask you a question, you can just say, like, can I formulate my thoughts for a second? I just want to organize my answer. And then kind of organize your answer and then like lay it out. Right? So it's not a race. Clarity of thought precedes clarity of communication. And don't try to sound smart. Don't just use big words. Because oftentimes the best communication does not have fancy words. It's just things that are like captured simply, right? And so like Leonardo da Vinci, I think, said it took him his entire life to learn how to paint like a child. I think the best written book I have ever read is A Briefer History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I think it really exemplifies how simple language is far superior to like flowery language. It was Picasso, okay. I don't know art, right? So like Briefer History of Time is amazing. Like he explains so much stuff so simply in such a small amount of time. So I think like simplicity of like language is the essence of good communication. And the whole reason that we have professional or specific terms is to economize our communication, right? So we use one word when like we use a complicated word to replace 5 simple words. That's why I use complicated words. Going back to our case, so what if they don't have autism? So I think all the above is still true. Autism is just a complicating factor. So if you live with siblings and your parents are unwilling to set limits with them and you are unwilling to set limits with them or unable to set limits with them due to power dynamics, then the first thing you should do is recruit the people who have the power to set limits. So it's going to be a conversation with like other family members. And then by all means, you can try to intervene with your sibling. You can have a conversation with them and be like, hey, this is really out of line. Can you please stop? And then when they say, yes, I will stop. And then when they don't stop, you can ask them, be like, hey, I asked you to do this. You said you were going to do it. Can you help me understand what makes it hard for you to like follow through? Right? Just be inquisitive. Don't try to blame them. Be like, I'm not trying to blame you. It's just like you said you were going to do something. You're not doing it. It's frustrating for me. I don't know what to do in this situation. I'm not sure because I have trouble sleeping. I don't know how to fix this problem. Will you help me? So that's the language that I would use. I would just kind of be very simple and plain that like, this is not working for you. Like, what can we do about this? Because when you don't have power over someone, when you don't have clout, you have to like concede that you can't force them into anything. So don't hold them to their promises. Just be like, hey, this is still a problem. I don't know how to proceed. Okay, fine, I'll stop. Be like, okay, so if you don't, then what should I do? No, but I will. I'll be like, okay, fine. So you're going to stop playing like what time today? And they're like, oh, no, I'm going to play. And then you'll be like, okay, this is why I'm confused. Because you say you're going to do something, you don't do it, and I don't know what to do. Like, I literally don't know what to expect. Or if you just tell me like, hey, I'm going to do this and, I'm going to be awake till 4 a.m. yelling every day. Sorry, like, that's fine. I can't make you stop, so I'll just learn to live with it. I just don't understand how to proceed in this situation. So you can use language like that. Yeah, so what if the family knows there's an issue, but the person doesn't want to accept professional help? So that's where like power comes in, right? So the big thing that we don't really like discuss very often, but I mean, as a society, we try to do it every now and then here at Healthy Gamer, is power dynamics. So like if someone doesn't want to accept professional help, first of all, you have to get them in the door, and then ideally a good professional will get the client to accept help. So when I said 30% of people in the rehab that I worked with, like, were going through divorce or separation, they were forced there. But once they get forced there, it's my job as the psychiatrist in charge to win them over. It's my staff's job to win them over. It's our job to, like, help this person understand that, yeah, we understand you were forced here. That sucks for you. But it sounds like if you leave, you're going to get a divorce and you don't want that. So how can we use the next 30 days, like, productively? So you got to stay. So how can we make our most of it? And oftentimes when I take that attitude with people, they're like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. Like, okay, these are some things. Is there anything that we can do that you actually want to work on? So you meet them where they're at, and then you kind of be like, okay, cool. So it sounds like you're having trouble sleeping. So, like, if nothing else, in 30 days, we're going to try to fix your sleep schedule. Are you okay sitting through this group therapy and all this other crap? I'll even use the word crap. They're like, yeah, fine, I'll do it. Okay, cool. Right? So then when we have a call with your partner a week from now, I'll tell them you're doing fantastic. Like, you're, attending all the sessions, all that kind of stuff. Right? So I want to be able to say that I'm not willing to lie for you, but this is what we need from you. Is that cool? And he's like, okay, cool. And they sit through the sessions. You kind of work, you work on them. You give them you got to give them some time. Let them come to you. But that's hard. You can do it, but it's hard. Okay. I think we're out of time, basically. But let me just leave y'all with one more. Okay. So let's do this one quick, okay? How can I do a dopamine detox while having depression and porn addiction? Well, that's the only time you can do a dopamine detox. What I would think is actually a harder question to answer is, how can I do a dopamine detox when I'm meditating at a monastery on top of a mountain for 30 days? Like, that's harder. So when thinking about what I do on a daily basis, I wake up, watch porn, go to my computer, play video games, watch YouTube, go to my bed, scroll through social media, go back to my computer, play video games, watch YouTube, back to my bed, watch porn, and so on. Right? A truly glorious life. When I try to do anything other than these highly dopaminergic activities like meditation, yoga, exercise, socializing, cooking, reading, hiking, all the healthy stuff, all I can think about is this over yet? Can I go back to my computer yet? Because I find almost zero enjoyment in these other activities. It feels like I have no competing interests that rival YouTube, video games, or porn. I have zero interest or desire in doing anything besides these three things. When I attempt doing a dopamine detox, I can't last for more than a day. My life has been like this for years. I used to enjoy making art, and I still want to be an artist, but I just don't really enjoy making art anymore, and I find it boring and pretty much pointless these last few years. I'm currently attending college right now, mainly to avoid having a job, and it feels like I'm only capable of doing the absolute bare minimum. It feels like I'm trapped in these dopaminergic activities, and my brain won't let me do anything else. Any advice? So, this is unfortunately a common problem, where people are stuck in a dopaminergic cycle of YouTube, pornography, video games, social media, sleep. Sometimes addictions are thrown in. Marijuana use, alcohol, what have you, vaping. So a lot of people are in this situation. And so they're like, I don't know how to stop this. Anytime I try to do the healthy stuff, it's boring. All my mind thinks is, I can't stop. When is this going to be over? When is this going to be over? When is this going to be over? When can I get back to the dopaminergic stuff that kills my soul but satisfies my brain? It's a big problem. So this is what the Jnana Yoga approach will be. Okay, so we're going to take a different approach to this question. So what a Jnana Yogi would say is, like, what are you expecting when you cook or you read or you go for a hike or you socialize? Like, what are you looking for? What do you think that's going to feel like? Are you doing these activities expecting it to do anything except for suck? Because that's what's going to happen. If your brain is addicted to dopamine, all these activities are going to suck. They're going to be awful. It's going to be terrible. Like, people will say, like, oh, I tried doing this stuff, but it's not as fun as YouTube or video gaming. Yeah, it's never going to be. That's why YouTube and video games are like, pornography are taking over the world. Because they are, by definition, more dopaminergic and more behaviorally reinforcing than cooking. No one's like, I'm addicted to cooking. I'm addicted to hiking, Dr. K. Help me. I'm addicted to hiking. I just can't stop. Every time I go for a hike, I rest for a little while and it's like, I gotta go out and buy celery and make myself a salad. Oh my God, I can't stop. No one gets addicted to that stuff, right? Because it's not addictive. So the first question is like, what are you expecting? Like, are you expecting this stuff to be fun? Or are you expecting it to like give you instant gratification like YouTube or pornography? Like, you think talking to another human being is going to feel anything like pornography feels? And so the first thing you've got to really ask yourself is, what are you expecting out of doing these activities? Are you waiting? Because this is what I oftentimes see, is that people are like waiting to get the dopamine hit from the reading. They're like, how many days do I need to read before I get the same dopamine hit that I get from playing a video game? And the Jnana Yogi would say, you're never going to get the same dopamine hit. So then the question, and then you're like, okay, well, if I'm never going to get the same dopamine hit, like, then what? What do I do? And that's where Jnana Yoga comes in again. And so then the question is like, what do you want your life to be? Right? So if you want your life to be a cycle of YouTube, video games, and pornography, then by all means, do what you're doing. If you want your life to be something else, like having a fulfilling relationship, not being filled with shame, being able to go to sleep, being proud of the way that you look, if you want some of those things, then this is not going to be the pathway to do it. And then you're going to say, well, like, those things are hard. And it's like, yeah, like, that's the price, right? So then at some point, you have to internally decide what's more important to you. Do you want to have your mind be not bored on a daily basis? Is that the most important thing to you? Then by all means, continue living the life you're living. Or are you willing to tolerate some boredom or a lot of boredom for the sake of some of these other things? And really ask yourself the question. Don't just default to, yeah, of course, so that's what I want to do. It's what I should do. I think. It's what everyone else does. If your mind is producing answers like that, you don't actually want it. It's just you think it's better, right? But that's not actually what you want to. And this is where Jnana Yoga comes in. So you really have to look at yourself and ask yourself, genuinely, what is more important to me? If I had a choice between having no dopamine and being bored out of my mind, but I had made art at the end of the year, versus a year of like losing myself in video gaming, pornography, and YouTube, which one would I pick? And then if you say to yourself, I would pick the art. And so, okay, interesting. So that means that you're going to have to be bored for a year. So let's start today. And then what does your mind say? Well, I don't like this. Okay, so like that's the choice that you have. Do you want to make choices that your mind likes? Or do you want to make choices that your mind dislikes? This is the path of Jnana Yoga. So this is something that we work a lot on in coaching. You guys saw someone was asking about coaching resources earlier. So we streamed one of our coach trainings. And one of our important coach trainings is about goal setting and motivation to help people navigate this internal struggle. Because when people lack motivation, like, you really have to look at yourself and realize that you don't lack motivation. It's just pointed in the wrong direction. You're very motivated. This person is highly, highly motivated. They're very motivated to watch pornography, play video games, and watch YouTube, to the exclusion of all these other dimensions in their life. When your life is going to hell in all of these different ways, that's not a sign of a lack of motivation. It's a sign of very, very high motivation, because you're sacrificing so much. You're ruining every other dimension of your life. So like, you have to be highly, highly, like, just think about how motivated you have to be to like ruin things that are important to you. You have to be really motivated. Is it not healthy? Sure. It's not healthy. No one's saying it's healthy, but let's be honest with ourselves about where our motivation is actually pointed. So this is the first problem that people don't understand, is they think I'm not motivated. Misdiagnosis. Just think about how successful you're going to be. If you diagnose yourself as a lack of motivation, when in fact what you have is too much motivation, how successful do you think you're going to get at getting out of that problem? It's like the opposite diagnosis, right? It's the exact opposite. It's like if you're hungry, if you don't realize you're hungry and you think you're full all the time and you're wondering like, what's going on? I'm full, and what you actually are is hungry, like, you're never going to fix that problem. You're like, I need to eat less, I need to eat less, I need to eat less, when actually you're hungry the whole time. So everyone's like trying to figure out, how do I find motivation? You don't need to find motivation. You need to get rid of motivation. That's why everyone's so damn stuck all the time. because you're so motivated for YouTube, video games, and pornography. And then you say, but that's not what I want to be motivated in. There's the second problem you run into. Because if that were true, you wouldn't be doing it. The thing you should realize is I'm highly motivated to do it. So it's like colossal misdiagnoses lead to people being stuck because you're solving a problem that doesn't exist instead of solving the one that does. And so this is what we try to train our coaches to help people figure out, is that it's not that there's so we have this drive matrix and things like that where you explore with people like, okay, what actually motivates you? What are the shoulds in your life and what are the things that you actually want? What are you driven towards and what do you think you should be doing? Let's understand that those are two entirely different things. Where does that come from? How do we work through that? How do we move things from the should column to the things that, I value or I care about? So there's a lot of reframing and things like that have to happen. But start off by recognizing, what are you expecting from not playing video games, pornography, and YouTube? What are you expecting? What do you think your life is going to be like? The truth is, it's going to suck in a lot of different ways. And there will be a different kind of enjoyment. So I'll just explain this very quickly, then we're going to wrap up for the day. So when you have a dopaminergic life, it feels really good in your mind. And it's like a desert for your soul. You're going to feel like in the in-between spaces, you're going to feel like existential dread, feel like your life is moving in the wrong direction, feel ashamed of yourself, feel envious of others. There's this whole pile of negative emotional demons that's hiding in the closet. And every once in a while, the door of the closet will open up and they'll come rushing out. And then it takes a lot of pornography to push them back in, right? Because pornography is the antidote to inner demons. And so if you're in that situation, what you're giving up, the trade that you make is the exact opposite, right? It's like having fulfillment and being proud of yourself and all that kind of stuff, maybe having a healthy relationship. But you're going to give up all the benefits of the dopaminergic crap. So you're not going to have fun. You're going to be bored at times. It's going to be hard. You're going to feel negative things. You're going to feel good things too. So you have to kind of choose between the brain and the soul. Because if you want to choose the brain, then you're going to get constant stimulation. It'll be sort of fun. But then you'll be raging at your teammates and feeling empty on the inside. And you can play video games as much as you want to fill up that emptiness. You can watch pornography as much as you want to do away with the feeling of loneliness and lack of companionship. And you can watch YouTube as much as you want to inform yourself about things that are neat instead of actually doing something in the world. You can learn about what other people are doing as much as you want to. It's never going to fix the hole of not having done anything yourself. The downside, though, is if you do things yourself, if you enter into a relationship and you find fulfillment, it's your mind is going to be in pain for parts of that. You're going to have to make sacrifice. Entering into a relationship is not all just, getting rid of your loneliness. It's like having to deal with another human being's emotional needs, which can be incredibly exhausting. Finding fulfillment in life and being proud of what you do oftentimes comes with blood, sweat, and tears. The problem is if you're in this dopaminergic whatever, the second that blood, sweat, or tears starts to happen, we just all fold, we cave. Back. Let me go back. So the real question that you should ask yourself, and this is the essence of Jnana Yoga, is what are you expecting? And what do you want? And what choice do you want to make? Because the choice is yours. You just need to make it and recognize that the choice, you have to stop picking the good choice and start picking the crappy choice. You have to start picking blood, sweat, and tears over enjoyment, relaxation, and hitting the fast forward button on your life. So then someone's asking, how do we get over that pain? It's the wrong kind of thinking. That's the thought that keeps you stuck. You don't get over the pain. What you need to choose is the path to not get over the pain. You need to accept the pain, embrace the pain. It ain't going anywhere. This is the whole problem. It's a beautiful question. How do I get over the pain? It's the exact question that causes failure over and over and over again. Because everyone's like, when does this end? It doesn't end. If you want to put together your life, it doesn't end. If you're waiting for the pain to stop, if you're waiting for a book to be as exciting as playing the Lost Ark beta, not going to happen. Maybe happen with Harry Potter Book 4. It's the closest we're going to get in our lifetime. Right? So accept that you're not going to get over it. And that's where you'll get free from it. Okay. Dr. K, more. Okay. Who are we rating, chat? I gotta go. I have a meeting. Is my boy Artur streaming? Okay, hold on. Let me just double check. Okay, he's streaming. Is he in a game? All right, let's just find out. He's streaming, right? Is he in a game? Oh, he's in game. Okay, okay, so let's stream RTZ. Oh, he's dying. Oh, he's dead. GG. I wonder if he has Discord muted. Otherwise, I can give him a call. Okay, we'll raid RTZ. All right, send Artur some love. And then, yeah, we'll see y'all on Wednesday, okay? Take care.